The dying star cast a blood-red glow through the research station's observation window. Dr. Rose Walker stood before it, her crystalline form catching the light and splitting it into thousands of tiny rainbows across the metal walls. She was the last of her kind, the final surviving member of the luminary race. Her fingers, transparent and glowing with inner light, moved swiftly across the holographic controls. Time was running out. The station's computers held the complete history of her people, their scientific achievements, and most importantly, their final discovery. The same discovery that had come too late to save them from the plague that had swept through their worlds like wildfire. Archive processing at 89%, the station's AI announced, its voice echoing through the empty corridors. Estimated time to completion, 47 minutes. Rose's internal light flickered with worry. The archives needed to be preserved. Without them, the plague that had destroyed her people might one day return to threaten other species. The luminary had been proud, perhaps too proud, believing their mastery over light and energy made them invincible. They had never imagined a disease that could turn their own radiant bodies against them, corrupting their light until they crumbled into lifeless dust. A sharp beeping from the sensor array broke her concentration. Rose moved to the security console, her heart sinking as she saw the readings. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace, their designs unmistakable. Angular, black vessels covered in sensor-dampening materials. The Void Hunters had found her. "Computer, activate defensive protocols," Rose commanded, her voice steady despite her fear. "Redirect power to the shield generators." "Warning," the AI responded. "Shield capacity at 43%. Full defensive capabilities unavailable due to power allocation to archive processing." Rose's fingers tightened on the console's edge. She couldn't stop the archive process. It was too important. But without full shields, the station would be vulnerable to boarding. The Void Hunters were scavengers of the worst kind, known for hunting down the last survivors of dying civilizations to steal their technology and secrets. "Incoming transmission," the computer announced. A harsh voice filled the command center. "Last light of the luminary." The Void Hunter captain's words dripped with mock respect. "We know you're alone up there. We've tracked you across 3 systems. Whatever you're protecting, it's over now. Surrender, and we'll make your end quick." Rose didn't bother responding. She knew what they really wanted: the archives. The Void Hunters had discovered that the luminary plague could be modified to affect other species. In their hands, it would become a terrible weapon. She moved quickly through the station, securing what she could. The archive had to complete its processing. After that, she could transmit the data to the emergency beacons she'd hidden throughout this sector. Even if she fell, the knowledge would survive. Multiple hull breaches detected, the AI warned. Boarding parties incoming on levels 2, 4, and 7. Rose sealed herself in the central laboratory, surrounded by the humming servers that contained her people's legacy. The Void Hunters would have to fight their way through several security checkpoints to reach her. Maybe that would buy enough time for the archive to complete. Through the laboratory windows, she could see the Void Hunters' ships taking up attack positions. Their black hulls stood out against the red star like wounds in space. Rose's inner light pulsed with determination. She might be the last of the luminary, but she would not let her people's final legacy become a weapon of mass destruction. The station shuddered as the first explosions rocked through its corridors. Rose stood straight and proud, her crystalline form glowing brighter with resolve. If these were to be her final moments, she would face them as her people always had, with light and courage. Archive processing at 92%, the computer announced, as the sound of cutting torches began to echo through the station's halls. Rose took up position behind a makeshift barricade, focusing her energy into her hands. She might not survive this day, but she would ensure her people's knowledge would go on to save lives, not end them. The first sounds of boots in the corridor reached her ears, and she prepared herself for what was to come. She never expected that salvation would arrive in the form of a human ship, dropping out of hyperspace at that very moment. Jack Stone had been mapping uncharted space for 3 months when his ship's sensors picked up the distress signal. He was tired. His coffee had run out 2 weeks ago, and his ship's AI kept suggesting he turn back to the nearest human outpost. But something about this signal was different. Unknown vessel detected, his ship's computer announced. Warning: 3 hostile ships also present in the sector. Jack leaned forward in his pilot's chair, studying the readouts. The research station orbiting the dying red star wasn't on any of his charts. More interesting were the energy readings coming from inside, unlike anything he'd ever seen. "Computer, what are we looking at?" Jack asked, rubbing his stubbled chin. "Station design is unfamiliar. Energy signature matches no known civilization in database. Hostile vessels identified as belonging to the Void Hunters, known scavengers, and pirates." Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd heard stories about the Void Hunters. They were the vultures of space, preying on the weak and desperate. His ship, the Star Runner, wasn't built for combat, but it had a few tricks up its sleeve. "Those pirates are cutting their way into the station," he muttered, watching the tactical display. "Computer, how many life signs inside?" "1 life sign detected. Reading is unusual, suggests non-carbon-based life form." Jack checked his weapon systems. The Star Runner carried just enough firepower to discourage most trouble, but taking on 3 Void Hunter ships was suicide. Still, he couldn't just watch someone get murdered by space pirates. "Computer, plot me a course that uses the dying star's gravity well. Let's see if we can't surprise our unfriendly neighbors." The Star Runner swooped toward the red giant, its engines burning hot. Jack had learned a thing ago that sometimes the best way to handle a fight was to make the other guy think you were completely crazy. Most pirates wouldn't risk their ships against someone who appeared to have nothing to lose. Inside the station, Rose looked up as new alarms sounded. "Computer, identify the new vessel," she called out, her crystal form pulsing with hope and worry. "Unknown design. Small vessel, likely a scout ship or explorer. Human markings detected." Rose had heard of humans. They were a relatively new species to join the galactic community, known for their unpredictable nature and tendency to survive situations that should have killed them. Some called them dangerous. Others called them miraculous. The station shook as the Void Hunters fired warning shots at the approaching human ship. To Rose's amazement, instead of retreating, the small vessel dove straight toward the star's corona, using its gravitational pull to slingshot around at incredible speed. "This is Jack Stone of the Star Runner." A calm voice came through the station's comm system. "Void Hunters, you're outnumbered." Rose could see the Void Hunters' ships on her monitors, their crews likely laughing at the claim. 1 small ship against 3 of theirs was hardly outnumbered. But then Jack did something that made Rose's inner light flare with surprise. He fired a single missile, not at the ships, but into a carefully calculated point in space where the star's magnetic field was strongest. The resulting explosion triggered a massive solar flare, catching 2 of the Void Hunter ships in its path. Their sensor-dampening hulls, designed to absorb energy, worked against them. The ships overloaded, their systems failing as the solar flare's energy overwhelmed them. "Last chance." Jack's voice came again, his ship already moving to target the 3rd vessel. "Leave now or find out what else I'm willing to try." The remaining Void Hunter ship quickly retreated, leaving its boarding parties behind. Rose watched in amazement as the small human vessel approached the station's docking bay. "Computer," she asked, still stunned by what she just witnessed, "did he really just use a dying star as a weapon?" "Affirmative. Analysis suggests a 43% probability of success for such a maneuver. Human pilot exceeded expected survival parameters." Rose moved toward the docking bay, her crystal form glowing with renewed hope. She didn't know whether to thank this human or question his sanity. Either way, she had to admit, it was an impressive entrance. The docking bay doors cycled open, and Rose prepared herself to meet her unexpected savior. wondering what kind of person would risk their life for a complete stranger in the middle of nowhere. The airlock hissed open, and Jack Stone stepped into the research station with his hand resting lightly on his sidearm. Years of space exploration had taught him to be prepared for anything. Still, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. Before him stood a being made of living crystal, nearly 7 feet tall, with light flowing through her form like liquid sunshine. Jack had met many alien species during his travels, but this was something entirely different. "I'm Jack Stone," he said, keeping his voice steady despite his amazement. "I picked up your distress signal." Rose studied the human with equal fascination. He was shorter than her, wearing a worn leather jacket over a standard flight suit. His face showed signs of fatigue, but his eyes were alert and intelligent. "I am Dr. Rose Walker," she replied, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed to echo slightly. "Last survivor of the luminary. And you, Jack Stone, just did something incredibly reckless to save my life." Jack shrugged, a small smile crossing his face. "Actually, I'd call it carefully calculated recklessness. Those void hunters left some friends behind, by the way. Their boarding parties are still in the station." As if to confirm his words, an explosion rocked the corridor behind them. Rose's light pulsed with worry. "They're trying to reach the central laboratory. I must protect the archives at all costs." "Archives?" Jack asked, checking the power level on his weapon. "My people's complete knowledge, including information about the plague that destroyed them." Rose's glow dimmed slightly. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized against other species. Jack nodded, already moving into action. "Okay, first things first. Computer," he called out to his ship's AI through his communicator. "Link with the station's systems. I want to know where those pirates are." Connecting now, both his ship and the station's AI responded in unison. 12 hostile life forms detected. 3 groups, converging on the central laboratory. Rose started to move toward the lab, but Jack held up his hand. "Wait, you said your people could manipulate light and energy, right?" "Yes, it's a natural ability of the luminary. And these corridors have standard power conduits running through them." Rose's inner light brightened as she understood his thinking. "Yes, and I could redirect that energy. But it would take time to modify the systems." "Time I can give you," Jack said, pulling out a small device from his jacket pocket. "This is a sonic disruptor. Not very powerful, but it should keep them busy. Here's what we're going to do." 5 minutes later, the first group of void hunters turned a corner to find Jack standing alone in the corridor, casually leaning against a wall. "Hi there," he said, waving. "I should probably mention that my friend is about to turn this entire section into a light show." The pirates raised their weapons, but Jack had already activated his disruptor. A high-pitched sound made them wince, just long enough for Rose to complete her modifications. The corridor's lights suddenly flared blindingly bright, the energy flowing out of the fixtures and taking physical form under Rose's control. "I've never seen a human work this way," Rose said as they moved to defend another section. "Most species run from the void hunters." "Well," Jack replied, setting up another ambush, "humans have a saying. The best defense is a good offense. Speaking of which," he triggered another set of charges he placed, blocking one of the corridors with debris. The remaining void hunters were now forced to take the route he and Rose had prepared. "Your archives," Jack said as they waited. "How much longer until they're processed?" 20 minutes, Rose answered, her crystal form glowing steadily. "That's why I couldn't give full power to the station's defenses earlier." Jack checked his weapon's charge. "Then we hold them off for 20 minutes. Simple as that." Rose looked at him curiously. "You say that as if it's an easy task." "Not easy," Jack grinned, hearing the sound of approaching footsteps. "But impossible is what humans do best, ready to show these pirates why they should have run when they had the chance." Rose's answer was to gather energy around her hands, creating orbs of pure light. Together, they prepared to face the next wave of attackers. Human ingenuity and luminary power working as one. The battle for the research station turned into a game of cat and mouse through its winding corridors. What the Void Hunters had in numbers and firepower, Jack and Rose made up for with creativity and desperation. "They're trying to flank us," Rose warned, her crystalline form pulsing with increased light as she monitored the station's sensors. Two groups coming from different directions. Jack looked around the laboratory they were defending, his eyes falling on a rack of research equipment. "What's all this stuff do?" he asked, pointing to several devices that looked like sophisticated microscopes and energy analyzers. "Those are quantum field manipulators and particle accelerators for studying light-based phenomena," Rose explained quickly. "But they're research tools, not weapons." A grin spread across Jack's face, the kind of grin that humans got when they had an idea that was either brilliant or insane. "Everything's a weapon if you use it right. Can you overload these things?" Rose's inner light flickered with surprise. "Yes, but that would create an unstable energy surge. It could." She paused, suddenly understanding. "It could overload their weapons and shields." "Exactly," Jack said, already moving to the equipment. "Humans have a talent for turning everyday things into tools we need. Right now, we need these pirates to think twice about coming in here." Working quickly, they modified the laboratory equipment. Jack's practical knowledge of engineering combined with Rose's understanding of energy manipulation created something the equipment's designers had never imagined. The first group of Void Hunters burst through the eastern door, weapons raised. Jack triggered the modified particle accelerator, sending a wave of quantum energy through the room. The pirates' energy shields sputtered and died, their weapons temporarily useless. "Now," Jack shouted. Rose responded by gathering the ambient light in the room and focusing it into a blinding flash. The pirates staggered, disoriented, as Jack used his sonic disruptor to drive them back. 7 minutes until archive completion, the station's AI announced. The second group of Void Hunters chose that moment to attack from the western entrance. They had learned from their companion's mistake and wore protective goggles, but they hadn't counted on Jack's next improvisation. "Rose, remember how you channeled power through the corridor lights?" he asked, pulling cables from a damaged console. "Can you do the same thing with this?" Understanding dawned in her crystalline features. While she couldn't directly harm living beings with her powers, there was nothing stopping her from conducting energy through the metal floor panels. The pirates found themselves dancing to avoid the electrified floor, their coordination broken. "You know," Jack said as they sealed the doors again, "most species would have just tried to blast their way through this situation." Rose's light pulsed thoughtfully as she helped him set up more impromptu defenses. "The Luminary always believed in technological superiority. We never considered using our tools in such creative ways." "That's the thing about humans," Jack replied, rewiring another piece of equipment into what he called a makeshift sonic fence. "We're not always the strongest or the most advanced, but we're really good at working with what we have." A massive explosion rocked the station. The remaining Void Hunters had decided to breach the hull of the laboratory directly from outside. Warning lights flashed as emergency force fields snapped into place. 4 minutes to archive completion. The AI updated them. Jack looked at their dwindling supplies and damaged equipment. "Okay, so they're learning. Time for something they won't expect." He turned to Rose. "How much power can you channel at once?" "Enough to overload any system on this station," she answered. "But that would leave us defenseless." "Perfect," Jack said, that familiar grin returning. "Because the best defense isn't always a good offense. Sometimes it's making your enemy think you're completely insane." Rose's glow brightened with curiosity. "What do you have in mind?" "Something crazy enough that only a human would think of it," Jack replied, already pulling up the station's schematics. "How do you feel about turning this entire lab into one giant energy conductor?" The sounds of cutting torches grew louder as the Void Hunters worked to breach the hull, unaware that inside, A human's desperate plan was about to change everything. Emergency lights cast red shadows across the laboratory as Jack and Rose worked to prepare their desperate defense. The sound of cutting torches grew louder as the Void Hunters continued their attempt to breach the hull. 2 minutes until archive completion, the station's AI announced. Jack wiped sweat from his forehead as he finished connecting the last power cable. Okay, the lab's ready to become one big energy conductor. But before we do this, I need to know, what's in these archives that's worth dying for? Rose's crystal form dimmed slightly as she looked at the computers still processing the vital data. It's not just my people's history, Jack. It's the key to preventing a disaster that could affect every living species in the galaxy. She placed her hand on one of the main terminals, and images appeared in the air around them. Jack saw worlds filled with crystal beings like Rose, all glowing with inner light. Then he watched as that light turned dark, spreading like a cancer through their bodies. The plague that killed my people wasn't natural, Rose explained. It was an accident, the result of our experiments with dark energy. We thought we could harness it, use it to create unlimited power. Instead, we created something that turned our own light against us. Jack's eyes widened as he understood. And the Void Hunters want this information to make weapons. Yes. The plague could be modified to affect any species that uses energy, which is virtually every advanced civilization. Rose's light pulsed with sadness. But the archives also contain the cure we discovered too late to save ourselves. In the right hands, this knowledge could prevent it from ever happening again. A loud crash echoed through the lab as the Void Hunters made progress with their cutting. Jack checked his makeshift defenses one last time. Hull breach imminent, the AI warned. 90 seconds until archive completion. They're not just coming for the weapon data, are they? Jack asked, suddenly realizing. They want you too. The last luminary. Someone who understands how to use all this information. Rose nodded. My people's ability to manipulate light and energy is part of our very being. The Void Hunters could spend years trying to understand our archives, but with me, she left the thought unfinished. Jack's jaw set with determination. Well, they're not getting either. Rose, remember how we used your power to channel energy through the corridor lights? He pointed to the cables he'd arranged around the lab. This is the same thing, but bigger. When they break through, you're going to push everything you've got through these cables. But that much energy, Rose's light flickered with concern. It could destroy the lab's equipment. The archives will be safer than if the Void Hunters get them. Jack finished. He pulled a small data chip from his pocket. While we were setting this up, I had my ship's AI make a copy. The original will finish processing in. He looked at the countdown. 30 seconds to archive completion, the AI announced as another crash shook the station. The hull began to glow red where the Void Hunters were cutting through. Jack positioned himself behind an overturned table, his weapon ready. Rose, he said quickly, I need you to trust me. When they break through, wait for my signal. And whatever happens, remember, humans are really good at surviving impossible situations. Rose took her position, gathering energy around her crystalline form. Why are you helping me, Jack? You could have fled when you saw the Void Hunters. Jack grinned, despite the tension. Because doing the right thing, even when it's crazy, that's another thing humans are good at. The hull finally burst inward, emergency force fields flickering as Void Hunters began pouring into the lab. At the same moment, the station's AI made its final announcement. Archive processing complete. What happened next would become a story told throughout the galaxy. A tale of how one human's crazy plan and one luminary's trust changed everything. Time seemed to slow as the Void Hunters poured into the laboratory. Their black armor absorbed the emergency lights, making them look like moving shadows. The leader stepped forward, weapon raised. Last chance, luminary, he growled through his helmet. Surrender the archives and yourself. You don't have to die like the rest of your kind. Jack glanced at Rose, giving her a slight nod. Everything depended on timing now. The cables he'd arranged around the lab lay ready, looking like innocent debris to the untrained eye. "You know," Jack said loudly, stepping into view with his hands raised, "there's something you should probably know about humans." The Void Hunters turned their weapons toward him, but their leader motioned them to hold. They were curious. Humans were known for their unpredictable nature. "And what's that?" the leader asked, his finger tight on the trigger. "We're really bad at giving up," Jack said, then shouted, "Rose, now." Rose's crystalline form erupted with brilliant light. She channeled every bit of energy she could gather into the cables Jack had prepared. Electricity coursed across the laboratory as the makeshift network came alive. The Void Hunters' energy shields overloaded instantly, their weapons shutting down. But Jack wasn't done. He pulled out his sonic disruptor and threw it into the center of the room. The device hit the electrified floor and burst, its frequency mixing with Rose's energy pulse. The combination created a wave of disruption that sent the pirates staggering. "Your turn," Jack yelled as he dove behind a console. Rose focused all her power into the lab's systems. Every screen, every light, every piece of equipment blazed with unbearable brightness. The Void Hunters screamed, their helmet visors failing to protect them from the intense light. "This is impossible," their leader shouted, blindly firing his backup weapon. "No one could channel this much power." "That's the thing about impossible," Jack said, moving through the chaos with practiced ease. "Humans do it all the time." He reached the main computer and plugged in a small device. "Rose, get ready to jump frequencies, just like we planned." Rose understood. She began shifting the energy wavelengths, creating a strobing effect that made it impossible for the Void Hunters to adapt. Their advanced armor, designed to absorb and neutralize energy attacks, couldn't handle the rapidly changing frequencies. But the station was beginning to break down under the strain. Warning alarms blared as systems overloaded. "Station integrity at critical levels," the AI announced. "Core systems failing." The Void Hunter leader, realizing his mistake too late, ordered a retreat. His pirates stumbled toward the breach they'd created, their coordination shattered by the continuing energy storm. "We need to move," Jack shouted over the chaos. "Rose, start falling back to my ship. I'll get the archives." Rose maintained her energy assault while backing toward the exit. "The archives aren't fully copied yet." "Trust me," Jack replied, typing commands into the computer. Sometimes the best solution is the craziest one. The laboratory was coming apart now. Panels exploded from the walls as power conduits overloaded. The remaining Void Hunters fled through their breach, leaving their leader behind. "You'll die here," the leader snarled, raising his weapon one last time. Jack looked at him calmly. "Maybe, but you'll never get these archives." He pressed a final button, and suddenly every screen in the lab lit up with the same message: "Upload complete." "What did you do?" Rose asked as they reached the exit. "Transmitted the archives to every emergency beacon in this sector." Jack grinned. "Good luck to them, trying to find them all." The leader roared in fury and fired. Jack pushed Rose through the doorway as energy bolts filled the air. Rose watched in horror as the shots hit the main power junction, exactly where Jack had connected all his cables. The resulting explosion rocked the entire station, and for a moment, it seemed like Jack Stone's impossible plan had finally met something even he couldn't survive. The explosion ripped through the research station like a small sun going nova. Rose's crystalline form sparkled with distress as she watched the laboratory section tear itself apart. The Void Hunter leader had vanished in the blast, but so had Jack. "No," she whispered, her inner light dimming with grief. He had saved her people's legacy, but at what cost? Then a voice crackled over her communicator. "You know, humans are also really good at timing." Rose's glow brightened instantly. Through the smoke and debris, she saw Jack climbing out of a maintenance shaft. His leather jacket was scorched, and he was limping, but very much alive. "How did you?" she began. Maintenance shafts are the first thing I check when I board any station. Jack grinned, though he winced as he moved. Best escape routes in an emergency. Now, we should probably leave before. The station's AI interrupted. Critical system failure. Station collapse imminent. 5 minutes until total structural failure. Before that happens, Jack finished. He pointed toward his ship, still docked at the far end of the corridor. Shall we? They ran for the Star Runner, the station breaking apart around them. Pieces of ceiling crashed down as support beams gave way. Rose used her powers to deflect the worst of the debris, while Jack's knowledge of station layouts got them through the chaos. They reached his ship with 2 minutes to spare. Jack jumped into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. Hold on to something, he called out as the engines roared to life. The Star Runner detached from the dying station just as the final collapse began. Rose watched through the viewport as her last connection to her people's physical world broke apart. But thanks to Jack's plan, their knowledge was safe, scattered across the sector in encrypted beacons. The archives, she said suddenly, turning to Jack. You said you transmitted them, but the Void Hunters will still be able to track the signals. Jack's grin widened as he pulled out a small data chip. They can try. But what I actually transmitted was a dummy signal. Thousands of them. Actually, the real archives are right here. Sometimes the best way to protect something isn't to hide it, but to hide it in plain sight. Rose's light pulsed with amazement. You planned this from the beginning. Well, maybe not the explosion part, Jack admitted, checking their course. But humans are good at adapting plans on the fly. Speaking of which, he turned to face her fully. What will you do now? Rose looked at the chip that contained her people's legacy. This knowledge needs to be shared with those who can use it to protect others. The plague that killed my people could still be discovered by someone else. We need to prevent that. I might know some people who could help, Jack said. Earth's scientists have been working on energy-based medical treatments. They'd understand the importance of using this knowledge for protection rather than weapons. You would trust your people with this? Rose asked. Humans have made plenty of mistakes in our history, Jack replied seriously. But we've learned that the greatest achievements come from working together, not against each other. Plus, he added with a slight smile, having the last luminary around to guide the research would be pretty helpful. Rose's glow brightened. Are you offering me a job, Jack Stone? I'm offering you a chance to make sure your people's legacy saves lives, he said. And maybe teach humans a few things about light and energy while you're at it. We're pretty good students, even if our methods are a bit unconventional. Through the viewport, the dying red star that had witnessed their battle began to fade into the distance. Ahead lay Earth, and a future neither of them had expected. Besides, Jack added, setting course for home, someone needs to explain to the science team why I'm bringing home a living crystal being who can manipulate light. Rose's musical laugh filled the ship's cabin. Tell them it's a human thing, doing the impossible and making friends along the way. As the Star Runner jumped to hyperspace, Rose realized that perhaps her people's end had also become a beginning. Sometimes, she thought, it takes a special kind of crazy, the human kind, to turn defeat into hope.